The stone cabin sat like a fortress against the Colorado Rockies, 3 miles from the nearest road and a world away from civilization. Sarah Chen thought she'd found the perfect retreat to spend her final weeks of pregnancy in peace. She was wrong. The storm hit without warning, a Category 5 blizzard that meteorologists would later call unsurvivable. Temperatures plummeted to -40, wind speeds reached hurricane force, the power died within hours. What Sarah didn't tell her husband before he left for his business trip was that she wasn't just a yoga instructor from Denver. For 8 years she'd been Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Army Special Forces, trained in Arctic survival and psychological warfare. Those skills had been buried under suburban life and prenatal vitamins, but when the cabin's walls began to crack under the storm's assault and something started scratching from inside the stone foundation, Sarah's forgotten instincts awakened. With her baby due any day and no way to call for help, she faced an impossible choice: stay and fight whatever lurked in the darkness or venture into the killing storm. But what was she really fighting? The storm, the shadows, or the ghosts of her own past? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's hands trembled as she placed another log on the dying fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across the cabin's interior, making the rough-hewn walls seem alive. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows in their frames. She'd witnessed storms before, survived worse conditions during her deployment in Afghanistan's mountains, but this was different. This storm felt personal, as if it had come specifically for her. The scratching sound came again from somewhere deep within the stone walls. 3 short scrapes, then silence, then 3 more. Just the house settling, she whispered to her swollen belly, feeling the baby stir restlessly inside her. At 38 weeks pregnant, every movement was a reminder of how vulnerable she'd become. Her body, once lean and powerful enough to carry a 60-pound pack through hostile terrain, now struggled to rise from the couch without assistance. She checked her phone again, though she knew it was pointless. No signal. The satellite internet had failed when the power went out, and the landline was dead. David wouldn't be back from his conference in Chicago for 3 days, assuming flights weren't cancelled indefinitely. She'd insisted on staying at the cabin, promising him she'd drive back to Denver if the weather turned. Another sharp crack echoed through the cabin as the wind found a new weakness in the structure. Sarah's training kicked in automatically: assess the situation, identify resources, prioritize threats. The immediate danger was hypothermia if the fire went out. She had maybe 2 days' worth of seasoned firewood inside, possibly another day's worth on the covered porch if she could reach it through the storm. The scratching resumed, louder now. Definitely not house settling. Something was moving behind the stones, following a pattern too deliberate to be random. Sarah stood slowly, her hand instinctively reaching for where her sidearm would have been years ago, finding only empty space beneath her maternity sweater. She moved toward the sound, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. The noise seemed to originate from the far wall near the stone fireplace. As she approached, she noticed something she'd missed during the day. The mortar between several stones looked newer, whiter than the rest. Someone had done recent repair work, sealing something behind the wall. The baby kicked hard, making her gasp and pause. "Easy, little one," she murmured, rubbing the spot. "Mama's just investigating." A massive gust of wind slammed into the cabin, and Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of wood splintering somewhere above. Part of the roof. Snow would start getting in soon, and with it, the killing cold. She forced herself to think like the soldier she'd once been. First priority, maintain body heat and shelter. Second priority, investigate the scratching. Whatever was behind that wall wasn't going anywhere, but she could freeze to death in hours if the cabin's integrity failed completely. Sarah gathered every blanket and sleeping bag she could find, creating an insulated nest near the fireplace. She changed into her warmest clothes. Thermal underwear. David had insisted she pack, wool socks and a heavy sweater. The movements felt familiar, muscle memory from countless cold weather exercises. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by something far worse: silence. In her experience, silence usually meant whatever was hiding had decided to move. She stood perfectly still, listening for any sound beyond the storm's fury. Then she heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping. Not from the walls this time, but from beneath the floorboards directly under her feet. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. Whatever was in the cabin wasn't trapped behind the walls. It was free to move through hidden spaces she couldn't see, couldn't predict. And now it knew exactly where she was standing. The wind had teeth now, Sarah realized. As she pressed her back against the cabin door she'd just managed to wrench shut. Each gust bit through the gaps in the weathered logs with surgical precision, finding every weakness in her defenses. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees in the past hour, and ice crystals were already forming on the window's interior surfaces. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. "We're okay," she whispered, though the words felt hollow against the howling outside. "We're going to figure this out." The cabin was larger than it had appeared from outside. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and what looked like a bedroom through an open doorway. Dust motes danced in the grey light, filtering through frost-covered windows. Someone had left it stocked with basic supplies. Canned goods lined a shelf near the kitchen, and a stack of firewood sat beside the hearth. Sarah's military training kicked in automatically. Assess, prioritize, execute. First priority, heat. The cabin's interior temperature couldn't be more than 40 degrees, and hypothermia would kill her and the baby long before starvation became a concern. She knelt beside the fireplace, grateful to find newspaper and kindling already arranged. Her fingers, stiff with cold, fumbled with the matches she'd found on the mantel. The first 3 matches died in the draft. The 4th caught, and she coaxed a small flame to life among the kindling. As the fire began to take hold, she fed it larger pieces of wood, watching orange light push back the gloom. Second priority, communication. Her phone showed no signal, as expected at this elevation during a storm. She searched the cabin for a landline or radio but found nothing. The isolation was complete. As warmth began to radiate from the fireplace, Sarah conducted a more thorough inventory. The kitchen held enough canned soup, beans and crackers to last maybe a week if she rationed carefully. A hand-pumped well in the corner provided water, ice cold but clean. More firewood was stacked on the covered porch, though retrieving it would mean battling the storm. She was examining the bedroom when she heard it, a scratching sound from somewhere inside the walls. Sarah froze, one hand automatically moving to her belly. The scratching came again, deliberate, rhythmic. Too organized to be random settling of old wood. "Mice," she said aloud, needing to hear a rational explanation, or squirrels had got in before the storm. But her training told her otherwise. The sound was too large, too purposeful. Something was moving inside the cabin's walls with intention. The baby kicked hard, as if responding to her spike of adrenaline. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly, deeply. Stress hormones could trigger early labor, and being trapped in a blizzard was dangerous enough without adding medical complications. This time, it was closer, somewhere behind the wall near the kitchen. The sound of claws or fingernails dragging against wood. Slow, deliberate strokes that raised every hair on her arms. Sarah stood carefully, her pregnant body protesting the quick movement. She approached the kitchen wall, pressing her ear against the rough logs. The scratching stopped immediately, as if whatever was making the sound had sensed her presence. "Hello?" she called softly. Silence. Then, impossibly, a response. 3 slow scratches, deliberate and measured. Sarah's breath caught. Animals didn't respond to human voices with such obvious intelligence. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Someone else trapped in the walls. But how, and why hadn't they called out for help? She knocked on the wall, 3 sharp raps. The response came immediately. 3 scratches, perfectly timed to match her knocks. Sarah backed away from the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't random. Something or someone was communicating with her, playing a game of call and response from inside the cabin's structure. Outside, the blizzard intensified, sealing her inside with whatever shared her shelter. The fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls that seemed to move independently of the flames. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah wrapped her arms protectively around her belly. She was trapped between the storm's lethal cold and an unknown presence that lived within these walls like a parasite. The scratching resumed, moving along the wall toward the bedroom. The wind had grown teeth overnight, gnawing at the cabin's foundation with a ferocity that made Maya's bones ache. She'd managed only fragments of sleep, her body too restless, too aware of the storm's escalating violence. Now, as pale morning light struggled through the frost-covered windows, she surveyed her situation with the methodical precision her old drill sergeant would have approved of. The power had died sometime before dawn. The digital clocks blinked uselessly, and when she flipped the light switch, nothing happened. The propane heater still worked, thank God, but the electric pump that brought water from the well had fallen silent. She turned the kitchen faucet and watched the last drops sputter out. "Inventory time," she murmured, one hand unconsciously resting on her belly where the baby had been unusually quiet since yesterday. The stillness worried her more than she wanted to admit. The kitchen cabinets revealed a meager collection: 2 cans of soup, a box of crackers, some instant coffee, and a sleeve of stale cookies Tom had forgotten to pack away. The refrigerator held milk that would spoil without power, some cheese, and leftover pizza from their drive up. Maybe 3 days of food if she rationed carefully, but pregnant women needed more calories, more nutrients. The baby needed more. The wind shrieked around the cabin's corners, and somewhere above her head something creaked ominously. Maya tilted her face toward the ceiling, listening. Old wood settling, she told herself. Just the storm testing every joint and beam. She pulled on Tom's oversized winter coat and forced the front door open against the wind's resistance. The world had vanished under a wall of white. Snow drove horizontally across her vision, and she couldn't see past the porch railing. The thermometer mounted beside the door read -8 degrees, and that was before factoring in the wind chill. The woodpile sat 20 feet from the cabin, but it might as well have been 20 miles. She'd need a rope or she'd lose her way in the whiteout. Maya retreated inside and began searching through closets and drawers until she found a coil of climbing rope in the bedroom. Tom's hobby had always seemed pointless to her, but now she blessed his need to haul himself up rock faces. She tied one end to the porch post and the other around her waist, then ventured back into the storm's maw. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her eyes water instantly. Each step was a battle against wind that threatened to knock her sideways. Snow had already buried the woodpile 3 feet deep, and she had to dig with her bare hands to reach the logs underneath. By the time she'd ferried 6 armloads of wood to the porch, her fingers had gone numb despite her gloves. Her pregnancy made her clumsy. Her center of gravity shifted just enough to throw off her balance in the treacherous conditions. The baby chose that moment to deliver a sharp kick to her ribs, as if protesting the harsh treatment. "Sorry, little one," she gasped, stumbling back inside. "Mama's doing her best." While her hands thawed painfully by the heater, Maya's military training kicked into full gear. She needed water, and melting snow would have to suffice. She filled every pot and pan with clean snow from outside the door, setting them near the heater to melt. The process was slow and yielded disappointingly little water, but it was better than nothing. But something about the sound's rhythm bothered her. It was too deliberate, too purposeful. Animals moved erratically, following instinct and opportunity. This sounded almost like something trying to work its way through the wood itself. She pressed her ear to the wall where the sound seemed strongest. For a long moment there was only the storm's howling. Then it came again, a slow, methodical scraping, as if something with claws was testing the wood's thickness, testing its resistance. Maya pulled back, her heart racing. Her military experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct screamed that something was wrong. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and crept toward the back of the cabin where the sound had been loudest. The bathroom shared a wall with what must be the crawl space beneath the cabin's addition. As she approached, the scratching stopped abruptly, as if whatever was making the sound had somehow sensed her presence. Maya held her breath, waiting. The silence stretched on, broken only by the storm's relentless assault and the rapid beating of her own heart. Then, so faint she almost missed it under the wind's roar, came a new sound. Not scratching this time, but something that made her blood freeze in her veins. Breathing, slow, measured breathing coming from inside the walls. The scratching sound came again at 2:47 a.m., jolting Sarah from her restless sleep on the couch. This time, it was different, more deliberate, almost rhythmic. She lay perfectly still, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as the baby shifted inside her. The wind had died down to occasional gusts, making the cabin unnaturally quiet except for that persistent noise. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. It was coming from the wall behind her head. Sarah's military training kicked in, flooding her system with controlled awareness rather than panic. She'd learned long ago to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming that something was wrong. Animals didn't scratch in patterns. Animals didn't pause as if listening. Moving slowly to avoid creaking the couch springs, she reached for the flashlight she'd kept within arm's reach. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rustic log wall. Nothing visible. But the scratching continued, now seeming to move laterally along the wall toward the kitchen. Sarah eased herself upright, fighting the familiar wave of dizziness that came with sudden movements these days. 8 months pregnant wasn't exactly optimal for investigating mysterious sounds, but she'd faced worse odds in Afghanistan with less at stake. At least then she'd only had herself to worry about. The scratching stopped abruptly. She waited, counting her heartbeats, a technique she'd used during sniper training to maintain steady aim. 60 beats, 90, nothing. Then she heard it, a soft thump from somewhere deeper in the cabin's structure, followed by what sounded almost like whispered conversation. The hair on her neck stood up. That wasn't an animal. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Squirrels or mice could have gotten into the walls before the blizzard, seeking shelter, but the patterns, the pauses, the apparent movement between different areas, none of that fit animal behavior. She thought about David's odd behavior when he'd brought her here. His insistence that this specific cabin was perfect, even though it was more isolated than necessary. His nervousness when she'd asked about the previous renters, the way he'd avoided her eyes when explaining why the owner was so eager to rent it out cheaply during peak season. Another thump, this time from the direction of the bedroom. Sarah forced herself to stand, using the couch arm for support. Her lower back ached, and the baby was pressing against her ribs, but she moved with the fluid silence that had once made her an exceptional soldier. Some skills you never lost, even when your body was busy creating life. She swept the flashlight beam across the main room, noting details she'd missed during daylight. The logs were old but well-maintained, chinked with what looked like relatively fresh mortar. But near the kitchen, she spotted something that made her pause, a section where the chinking looked different, newer, hastily applied. The scratching resumed, definitely coming from that area now. Sarah approached cautiously, playing the light along the wall. Up close, she could see that a roughly 3-foot section had been recently repaired. The mortar was a slightly different color, the work amateur compared to the rest of the cabin's professional construction. Someone had opened this wall and sealed it back up. Her pulse quickened as fragments of her EOD training surfaced, the careful observation of anomalies, the recognition that human-made inconsistencies usually meant human-made problems. She'd spent months in Iraq looking for things that didn't belong, signs that someone had been where they shouldn't have been. Sarah backed away, her mind working through tactical assessments. The storm made calling for help impossible. Her phone had no signal. David wouldn't be back for days, assuming the roads were even passable by then. She was alone, pregnant, and dealing with something that defied easy explanation, but she wasn't helpless. Not yet. Moving to the kitchen, she opened drawers until she found what she was looking for, a decent-sized knife and a heavy-duty screwdriver. The knife went into her back pocket. The screwdriver she gripped like a weapon while she examined the suspicious wall section more closely. The scratching had stopped again, but now she could hear something else, a faint rustling, like fabric or paper being moved around. Whatever was in there, it wasn't trying to get out. It was already out, moving through spaces she couldn't see. Sarah's breathing quickened as the full implication hit her. The wall had been opened and resealed from the outside. Someone had put something in there deliberately, and if they'd gone to the trouble of concealing it, they'd probably planned to come back for it. The question was, had they come back already? She thought about the unlocked door, the too-good-to-be-true rental price, David's nervous energy. Her hand moved protectively to her belly as another possibility occurred to her, one that made her blood run cold. What if she wasn't here by accident? The scratching had stopped, but Sarah's nerves remained wire-tight as she methodically searched the cabin's main room. Her military training whispered instructions she'd thought were buried forever. Assess the environment, identify potential threats, secure your position. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if sensing her elevated heart rate. She pulled the heavy oak dining table away from the wall, wincing at the scraping sound it made against the wooden floor. Behind it, the log wall looked solid, but when she pressed her ear against the timber, she could swear she heard something, a faint rustling, too deliberate to be settling wood. The wind outside had intensified, driving snow against the windows with machine-gun intensity. Perfect cover for whatever was moving inside these walls. Sarah grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace, its iron weight familiar and reassuring in her grip. She'd handled worse weapons in worse situations, though never while 7 months pregnant. Moving toward the kitchen, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Tiny wood shavings scattered across the floor near the baseboards, fresh enough that they hadn't been there when she'd arrived yesterday. Something was actively chewing or clawing its way through the cabin's structure. A sudden thump from overhead made her freeze. The sound came from directly above the kitchen in what she assumed was an unused attic space. Another thump, followed by a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Sarah's breathing quickened. She forced herself to slow it down, drawing on techniques she'd learned in combat zones. Panic killed more soldiers than bullets ever did. The baby seemed to respond to her calming efforts, settling into a less frantic rhythm of movement. She opened kitchen drawers systematically, searching for anything useful. Most contained the usual cabin fare, can openers, dish towels, matches, but the third drawer revealed something promising. A heavy-duty flashlight, military-grade, the kind that could double as a weapon if necessary. She tested it. The beam cut through the cabin's dim interior like a sword. Above her, the dragging sound resumed, moving from the kitchen area toward what she estimated was the bedroom. Whatever was up there wasn't small. The ceiling creaks suggested significant weight, definitely not mice or even rats. Her mind catalogued possibilities, raccoons, maybe a bear that had somehow gotten inside to escape the storm. Both scenarios were dangerous, especially in her condition. The cabin's construction became clearer as she examined it with tactical eyes. Log exterior walls, but the interior divisions were newer frame construction with drywall. Someone had renovated this place, creating hollow spaces between the old structure and new walls. Perfect hiding places for animals seeking shelter, or worse. A new sound joined the symphony of scratching and thumping, a low, rhythmic tapping like claws on wood. It seemed to follow her movements, starting when she entered the bedroom, stopping when she paused. Sarah's skin crawled. Animals didn't usually track human movement so deliberately. She found the attic access in the bedroom ceiling, a simple pull-down ladder hidden behind what looked like a decorative panel. Fresh scratches marked the wood around the opening. Something had definitely been using this entrance. The poker felt inadequate suddenly. Sarah returned to the kitchen and selected the largest knife from the block, testing its edge against her thumb. Sharp enough. She tucked it into her waistband and kept the poker in her dominant hand. The baby shifted dramatically, pressing against what felt like her entire left side. Sarah paused, one hand on her belly, feeling the strong kicks and rolls. Whatever happened next, her priority was clear. This child would survive, even if she didn't. Her phone showed no signal, and the landline she'd noticed earlier was dead, probably lines down from the storm. She was truly alone, cut off from any help, with something unknown living in the walls around her. The baby kicked again, a sharp reminder of what she was fighting for. Sarah smiled grimly, shifting her grip on the poker. Whatever was hiding in this cabin was about to learn that cornering a pregnant former soldier was a very dangerous mistake. The scratching stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Sarah suspended in a silence that felt more threatening than the noise itself. She pressed her ear against the wall, straining to hear any movement, but the only sound was her own rapid breathing and the relentless howl of wind outside. Her military training kicked in, pushing down the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She needed to think tactically. Whatever was in those walls had patterns. It moved during certain times, seemed to respond to her presence. The question was whether it posed an immediate threat to her and the baby. Sarah backed away from the wall slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and quiet. The baby shifted inside her, a gentle roll that reminded her of what was at stake. She couldn't afford to make assumptions or let fear cloud her judgment. The cabin's layout suddenly became critical terrain to map. She moved through each room methodically, pressing her ear to different sections of wall, tapping gently with her knuckles. The responses she heard made her blood run cold. The scratching wasn't isolated to one area. Whatever was in there had access to the entire wall system. In the bathroom, she discovered something that made her stomach lurch. Behind the toilet, barely visible in the dim light, were scratch marks gouged into the drywall. They were fresh, the white plaster dust still scattered on the floor below. Something had been trying to claw its way out. Sarah knelt carefully, her pregnancy making the movement awkward, and examined the marks more closely. They were too large to be from mice or even rats. The gouges were deep, deliberate, made by something with considerable strength. But the pattern was wrong for a raccoon or other common wildlife. These marks showed intelligence, purpose. A new sound made her freeze, a low, rhythmic thumping from somewhere in the walls. It moved along the bathroom wall, then toward the kitchen, as if something was deliberately traveling through the space between the rooms. Sarah followed the sound, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. The thumping stopped directly behind the kitchen sink. Sarah held her breath, waiting. Then she heard something that made her skin crawl, a wet, sliding sound, like something being dragged through a narrow space. The pipes. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The old cabin's plumbing and heating systems created a network of passages throughout the walls. Whatever was in there wasn't just hiding, it was using the infrastructure to move around. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. A person could potentially fit through some of those spaces, especially the larger heating ducts. But the scratching, the animal-like sounds, nothing about this suggested human presence. She moved to the kitchen window and peered out into the storm. The blizzard had intensified, creating a white wall that made it impossible to see more than a few feet. Even if she wanted to leave, even if she was willing to risk the baby's life, the weather had made escape impossible. The cabin shuddered under a particularly violent gust of wind, and Sarah heard something new, a scraping sound from above. She looked up at the ceiling, following the noise as it moved across the kitchen toward the living room. Whatever was in the walls had found its way into the space above her head. Her training told her to establish a defensive position, somewhere she could control access and have clear sight lines. The living room was too open, too many points of entry through the walls. The bathroom was too small, would leave her trapped. That left the bedroom, where she could position herself with her back to the exterior wall and watch the doorway. But first, she needed to understand what she was dealing with. Sarah returned to the kitchen and quietly opened the cabinet under the sink. The space was cramped and dark, filled with old plumbing and the musty smell of decades-old wood. She used her phone's flashlight to peer into the shadows, looking for any sign of how something might be accessing the wall spaces. What she found made her question her sanity. There, behind the main water pipe, was a hole roughly 2 feet in diameter. The edges were smooth, deliberately cut, not worn by time or damage. Someone had created this opening, had meant for something to move through here. The implications crashed over her in waves. This wasn't an accident or coincidence. Someone had prepared this cabin, had modified it specifically to allow something to move unseen through the walls. The isolation, the storm, her vulnerable condition, none of this was random. As if summoned by her discovery, the scratching resumed with renewed intensity. But now it was different, more urgent, coming from multiple locations at once. Whatever was in there knew she had found its pathway. The game between them had fundamentally changed, and Sarah realized with growing dread that she might have been the prey from the very beginning. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them both. The scratching had stopped, but Sarah knew better than to feel relieved. In her years of reconnaissance training, she'd learned that silence often preceded the most dangerous moments. She pressed her ear against the kitchen wall, counting her heartbeats while listening for any sound that might betray whatever was moving through the cabin's hidden spaces. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. Even her unborn child seemed to sense the tension, shifting and kicking with unusual intensity. The fire crackled behind her, casting dancing shadows that made every corner seem alive with potential threats. A new sound emerged, deliberate and rhythmic, not scratching this time, but a soft tapping. 3 quick taps, followed by 2 longer ones, then 3 quick again. Sarah's blood went cold. She recognized the pattern immediately, SOS in Morse code. Someone was trapped in the walls, trying to communicate. Her military training kicked in, suppressing the wave of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She needed intel. Moving carefully along the wall, she followed the sound to its source, a section near the back corner of the kitchen where the wood paneling looked slightly newer than the rest. The tapping grew louder as she approached. Sarah grabbed a flashlight from the counter and examined the wall more closely. The boards here were secured with different nails, their heads still bright silver, while the others had darkened with age. Someone had opened this section recently and sealed it back up. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a muffled voice. Weak, desperate, unmistakably human. "Help! Please!" Sarah's hands trembled as she searched the kitchen drawers for something to pry the boards loose. The voice came again, clearer now that she was closer. "Cold, so cold, been here days." A claw hammer felt reassuring in her grip. Sarah positioned the claw end against the edge of the first board and pulled. The nail shrieked in protest but held firm. She adjusted her stance, bracing her feet and using her leg muscles to add force. Pregnancy had changed her center of gravity, but muscle memory from countless training exercises guided her movements. The first nail gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the cabin, then the second. As she worked on the third, the voice behind the wall became more urgent. "Hurry, please, can't feel..." Fingers. The board came free, revealing a gap just wide enough for her flashlight beam. Sarah peered through and gasped. A face stared back at her, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that reflected her light like an animal's. A woman, maybe in her 30s, with matted brown hair and cracked lips. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "How long have you been in there?" 3 days, maybe 4. Hard to tell. The woman's voice was barely audible. "Thought I was going to die." Sarah attacked the remaining boards with renewed urgency. Each nail seemed to take forever, her pregnancy making the physical labor more taxing than it should have been. But finally, she'd created an opening large enough for the woman to crawl through. She emerged like something from a nightmare, emaciated, shivering violently, wearing torn jeans and a blood-stained sweater. Sarah caught her as she collapsed, supporting her weight and helping her to the couch near the fire. "What happened? Who did this to you?" Sarah asked, wrapping a blanket around the woman's shoulders. "My name is Lisa Chen," she said through chattering teeth. "I was hiking, got caught in the storm, found this place." She paused, accepting the cup of warm broth Sarah offered. The owner, he seemed nice at first, offered shelter. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. "Owner? What owner?" "Marcus something, tall guy, maybe 50. Said he lived here year-round." Lisa's eyes darted toward the windows. "He left yesterday morning, said he was going for supplies. But before he left, She couldn't finish the sentence. "He trapped you in the wall," Sarah completed, her mind racing. Someone else knew about this cabin, someone who might return. "He's dangerous," Lisa whispered. "Really dangerous. I heard him talking to himself, planning things, awful things." She grabbed Sarah's arm with surprising strength. "We have to get out of here before he comes back." Sarah looked toward the windows where the blizzard still raged with undiminished fury. Visibility was near zero, the wind howling like a living thing. Even with her survival training, attempting to leave in these conditions while pregnant would be suicide. "The storm's too strong," she said. "We'll have to wait it out and hope." A sound from outside cut her off, the distant rumble of an engine fighting through the snow. Headlights swept across the windows, growing brighter. Lisa's face went white with terror. "He's back," she whispered. "God help us, he's back." The engine stopped. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow, approaching the cabin's front door. The scratching had stopped, but Maya knew better than to trust the silence. She pressed her ear against the kitchen wall, holding her breath as she listened for any sound beyond the wind's relentless howl. Nothing. Yet the absence of noise felt more ominous than the mysterious clawing that had kept her awake. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby had been unusually active since dawn. As if sensing the tension radiating through her body, the little one kicked and shifted restlessly. Maya whispered soft reassurances, though she wasn't sure who needed comforting more. The fire had burned low during the night, and the cabin's temperature had dropped enough that her breath formed small clouds in the morning air. She needed to get the flames going again, but first she had to investigate the source of those sounds. Her military training demanded reconnaissance before comfort. Moving carefully across the creaking floorboards, Maya retrieved the heavy-duty flashlight from her emergency kit. The beam cut through the dim cabin interior as she approached the back wall systematically. Up close, she could see something she'd missed in the darkness, thin scratches in the wood paneling, barely visible but definitely fresh. The marks formed irregular patterns, as if something had been trying to claw its way out from inside the wall. Maya ran her fingers along the scratches, feeling the splintered wood catch at her skin. Whatever made these marks had been desperate, frantic even. The gouges were too small for a person, but too purposeful for random pest activity. Her pulse quickened as she noticed something else. The wall felt hollow in this section, different from the solid timber construction elsewhere. She tapped gently with her knuckles, confirming her suspicion. There was definitely empty space behind this panel. Maya examined the edges more closely and discovered what appeared to be a seam, camouflaged by years of accumulated dust and careful craftsmanship. Someone had installed a hidden compartment. The baby kicked hard, making her gasp and step back from the wall. The movement was so sudden and forceful that Maya had to steady herself against the kitchen counter. She breathed slowly, counting each inhale and exhale, the way her combat medic training had taught her. Stress wasn't good for either of them right now. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, the wind seemed to be gaining strength, rattling the cabin's windows with increasing violence. Snow had drifted against the front door during the night, and she could see through the kitchen window that the world beyond had been transformed into a white void. No help would be coming today. Maya returned to the suspicious wall panel, this time armed with a butter knife from the kitchen drawer. She worked the blade along the seam, applying gentle pressure until she felt something give. The panel shifted slightly, revealing that it was designed to swing open on hidden hinges. Her heart hammered as she pulled the panel wide enough to shine her flashlight into the space beyond. The beam illuminated a narrow cavity that extended deeper into the wall than she'd expected. The air that escaped carried a musty, unpleasant odor that made her stomach churn. Inside the hidden space, Maya could see stacks of papers, what looked like old photographs, and several small objects she couldn't immediately identify. But it was the scratches covering the interior walls that made her blood run cold. They were everywhere, desperate claw marks that told the story of something trapped, something that had fought frantically for freedom. She reached for the nearest stack of papers, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled them into the light. The documents were old but well preserved in the dry cavity. The top sheet appeared to be a letter, written in careful cursive handwriting. Maya's eyes widened as she read the first few lines. "If someone finds this, please know that I tried to warn them. The Hendricks family who owns this cabin, they're not what they seem. What they did to those missing hikers, what they're planning to do again." The letter was dated 15 years ago, signed by someone named Rebecca Chen. Maya's pulse raced as she realized she recognized that name from the missing persons flyers she'd glimpsed at the ranger station. Rebecca had been one of 3 hikers who'd vanished during a winter expedition in this area. Another fierce kick from the baby snapped Maya back to the present moment. She looked down at her belly, then back at the hidden compartment. Whatever had happened here years ago, whatever dark secrets the previous owners had hidden, she was now trapped in the same isolated location with the same merciless storm raging outside. The scratching sounds returned suddenly, seeming to come from deeper within the walls, from places she couldn't see or reach. Maya clutched the letter tighter, understanding with growing dread that she might have stumbled onto something far more dangerous than a winter storm. The cabin's previous inhabitants had secrets worth hiding, and now she was alone with whatever they'd left behind. The scratching had stopped, but Maya knew better than to trust the silence. She pressed her back against the kitchen counter, the knife heavy in her grip, and forced herself to breathe slowly through her nose. The baby kicked again, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her wince. Even her unborn child seemed to sense the danger. The floorboards creaked overhead. Maya's blood turned to ice. Whatever was in the walls had found a way into the main structure of the cabin. She tilted her head upward, tracking the sound as it moved across the ceiling from the bedroom toward the living room. Dust motes drifted down from the old wooden beams. Her military training kicked in, suppressing the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She needed to establish a defensible position and identify her enemy. The kitchen offered multiple exit routes: the back door, the doorway to the living room, and, if necessary, the window above the sink. But in her condition, climbing through windows wasn't exactly tactical. The scratching resumed, this time directly above her head. Then, without warning, a section of the ceiling sagged. Bits of plaster rained down, and Maya scrambled backward just as something crashed through. A man dropped into her kitchen. He landed hard on his hands and knees, gasping and covered in dust and insulation. Maya raised the knife, her heart hammering, but then she got a good look at him. He was young, maybe early 20s, with wild dark hair and clothes that hung in tatters. His eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal's, and when they fixed on her, she saw something that made her hesitate, fear that matched her own. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Don't scream, don't. I'm not going to hurt you." "Who are you?" Maya kept the knife pointed at him, though something about his demeanor made her think he might be more afraid than she was. "How did you get in my walls?" "Your walls?" He looked confused, then seemed to really see her for the first time. The knife, her pregnant belly, her defensive stance. "This isn't your cabin. This is—" "Wait." His eyes widened. "You're not supposed to be here. What's that supposed to mean?" The young man struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. In the lamplight, Maya could see he was malnourished, his cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin. "They said the cabin would be empty. They said I could hide here until—" He stopped abruptly, as if he'd revealed too much. Until what? Who's they? Before he could answer, the sound of engines cut through the howling wind outside. Maya's blood chilled as she recognized the deep rumble of snowmobiles, multiple ones, moving fast despite the storm. The young man's face went white. "They found me," he breathed. "Oh God, they found me." Maya moved to the kitchen window and peered through a gap in the boards she'd nailed up earlier. Through the swirling snow, she could make out lights moving through the trees, heading straight for the cabin. Her mind raced, processing the tactical situation. Unknown number of hostiles approaching, one potential ally of questionable trustworthiness, heavily pregnant woman in need of protection. "Listen to me," she said, turning back to the young man. "I don't know who you are or what you've done, but I need to know right now, are these people dangerous?" "Very." His voice was barely audible. "They killed my brother when he tried to run. They'll kill you too if they think you've seen too much." The engines were getting closer. Maya made a split-second decision, one that went against every instinct screaming at her to trust no one. "Can you fight?" What? "Can you fight?" she repeated, moving toward the living room. "Because in about 30 seconds, we're going to be outnumbered and outgunned, and I can't do this alone." The young man followed her, stumbling slightly. "I don't understand. You don't even know me. Why would you?" "Because right now, you're the enemy of my enemy, and that's going to have to be good enough." Maya grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace and thrust it at him. "Take this. Stay low, and whatever happens, don't let them get behind us." The engine noise stopped abruptly, replaced by the slam of doors and the crunch of boots on snow. Maya positioned herself behind the overturned couch, grateful for the barricade she'd built earlier. The young man crouched beside her, clutching the poker with white knuckles. "What's your name?" Maya whispered. "Danny. I'm Maya. And Danny, when this is over, you're going to tell me everything about who those people are and why they want you dead." Heavy footsteps climbed the porch steps. Someone tested the door handle, found it locked, then moved along the front of the cabin. Maya counted at least 3 distinct sets of footprints, possibly more. A voice called out through the storm, cold and professional. "We know you're in there, Daniel. Come out now, and we'll make this quick. Make us come in after you, and things get messy." Danny whimpered softly. Maya touched his shoulder, steadying him. The real fight was about to begin. The basement stretched into darkness beyond the weak beam of her flashlight, its ceiling barely high enough for her to stand upright. Sarah moved carefully down the wooden steps, each creak echoing in the confined space. The air smelled of earth and decay, with an underlying metallic tang that made her stomach clench. Her military training kicked in automatically. Sweep the corners, identify exits, catalog potential weapons. The basement ran the length of the cabin above, divided into 3 distinct sections by rough stone walls. Storage shelves lined the near wall, filled with canned goods and camping supplies that suggested the cabin's previous owners had prepared for extended stays. But it was the far corner that drew her attention. The beam of her flashlight caught something that didn't belong, a section of the stone wall that looked newer than the rest, the mortar still pale grey against the weathered blocks surrounding it. Sarah approached slowly, her bare feet silent on the cold concrete floor. The wall had definitely been rebuilt recently, probably within the last year based on the color of the cement. She pressed her ear against the stones, listening for any sound from the other side. Nothing but the howling wind above and the settling groans of the old cabin. She ran her fingers along the mortar joints, feeling for weak spots. Military engineers had taught her to read structures, to find the stress points that could bring down walls or open locked doors. This wall had been built quickly, she realized. Functional but not expert work. A sharp kick of movement from her belly reminded her why she was down here. The baby was active now, responding to her elevated heart rate and adrenaline. She placed a protective hand over her stomach and whispered, "I know, little one. Mama's scared too." The sound of wood splintering from upstairs made her freeze, not the random crack of settling timber, but the deliberate snap of something being broken. Footsteps followed, heavy and measured across the floor above her head. Sarah killed the flashlight and pressed herself against the rebuilt wall, her heart hammering. Someone was in the cabin, someone who knew she was here, who had waited for the right moment to make their move. The footsteps moved methodically from room to room, searching. She could track the intruder's progress by the creaking floorboards, kitchen to living room to bedroom, looking for her. Her fingers found a loose stone in the wall beside her, and she worked it free as quietly as possible. The rock was heavy enough to do damage if she could get close enough to use it, but in her condition, fighting wasn't her first option. The basement stairs groaned under someone's weight. Sarah moved deeper into the darkness, feeling her way along the far wall toward what she hoped was another exit. Her fingers found wooden slats, a door, she realized, though it felt swollen shut from moisture. She pushed against it gently, testing its resistance. A flashlight beam swept the basement stairs, much stronger than hers. Professional equipment, the kind someone would bring if they were planning to hunt in the dark. "I know you're down here," a male voice called out. Calm, almost conversational. "There's nowhere else you could have gone. The storm's got us both trapped, so why don't we just talk this through?" Sarah bit back a response. Let him think she was hiding in the main basement area while she worked on the door. The wooden frame was warped, but old hinges gave her leverage. She put her shoulder against the door and pushed, feeling it give slightly. "I'm not going to hurt you," the voice continued, closer now. The flashlight beam danced across the walls as he descended into the basement. "I just need to know what you've seen, what you've figured out." The door gave way suddenly, nearly sending her tumbling into the space beyond. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of earth and something else, something that made her gag. She covered her nose and mouth with her shirt and stepped through the doorway. Another room, smaller than the main basement. Her flashlight revealed what the rebuilt wall had been hiding. 3 sleeping bags arranged against the far wall, but they weren't empty. The shapes inside them were wrong, too still, too flat. Sarah forced herself to look closer, though every instinct screamed at her to run. Human remains. Old enough that only bones and clothing remained, but recent enough that scraps of fabric still clung to the skeletons. A family, she realized with horror. 2 adults and what looked like a teenager. "Found my previous guests, did you?" She spun around. The man stood in the doorway, his flashlight beam blinding her. Medium height, winter coat, face hidden in shadow. In his other hand, something metallic glinted. "They were supposed to leave after the storm passed," he continued conversationally. "But they'd seen too much, just like you have now." Sarah gripped the loose stone tighter, calculating distances and angles. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the danger. "Now we have a problem," the man said, stepping into the burial room, "because I really don't like killing pregnant women." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Sarah's hand remained steady on the axe handle, but her mind raced as she processed Marcus's words. The way he said we sent ice through her veins colder than the storm outside. "Who else?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's eyes darted toward the kitchen window, then back to her. "My partner. He's been watching the perimeter, making sure you didn't try to run." A bitter laugh escaped his throat. "Not that you could get far in this weather." Sarah's military training kicked in, cataloging escape routes and tactical advantages. The cabin had 3 exits: front door, back door, and the cellar entrance, all likely monitored. The storm provided cover but also made movement treacherous. Her pregnancy limited her mobility, but desperation could overcome physical limitations. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, shifting slightly to keep both the kitchen entrance and the living room in her peripheral vision. "It's not about what I want anymore." Marcus's voice carried a note of resignation that made him seem more dangerous, not less. "We were hired to make sure you never made it off this mountain. But then the storm hit, and plans changed." The baby kicked sharply against her ribs, as if sensing the threat. Sarah pressed her free hand against her belly, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "The child complicates things," Marcus continued. "My partner, he doesn't see the problem with collateral damage, but I have kids of my own." "So you're having second thoughts?" Sarah tested the waters, looking for any advantage she could exploit. "I'm having survival thoughts." His grip tightened on the knife. "Because if we don't finish this job, there are people who will make sure we never see our families again." A soft creak came from somewhere deeper in the cabin. Sarah's head snapped toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. The noise had come from the direction of the back bedroom, the same room where she'd first heard movement in the walls. Marcus heard it too. His posture shifted, becoming more alert. "He's getting impatient." "How long have you been here?" Sarah asked, pieces of a horrifying puzzle falling into place. "Those sounds in the walls, that was him moving around, wasn't it? We've been here since yesterday morning, arrived just before the storm really hit." Marcus glanced again toward the back of the cabin. "There's a crawl space that runs through most of the structure. Old mining cabin, they built them with hidden spaces for storing equipment and supplies." Sarah remembered the architectural oddities she'd noticed, the walls that seemed thicker than necessary, the strange acoustics in certain rooms. Someone had been living in the bones of the cabin itself, watching her every move. Another creak, closer this time, definitely from the hallway leading to the bedrooms. "Sarah." Marcus's voice held a warning. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Drop the axe, and I'll make sure it's quick. The alternative?" He shook his head grimly. Instead of compliance, Sarah felt a familiar coldness settle over her, the same detached calm she'd experienced during combat operations. Her muscles relaxed, her breathing steadied, and her mind cleared of everything except tactical assessment. The axe wasn't just a weapon, it was a tool. The cabin's layout favored defense if she could reach the right position. The storm outside was an ally, not an enemy. It would mask sound and movement. "You made one mistake," she said quietly. Marcus frowned. "What's that?" "You assumed I'd forgotten how to fight." Sarah moved with a speed that caught him off guard, not attacking but diving toward the living room where she could put the couch between them and gain access to the fireplace poker. Marcus lunged after her, but she was already rolling, using her momentum to come up in a defensive crouch. The front door exploded inward with a crash that shook the entire cabin. Snow and wind howled through the opening as a figure emerged from the storm. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing military-grade cold weather gear. This had to be Marcus's partner. "Enough playing around," the newcomer shouted over the wind. "Take her down, or I will." Sarah found herself trapped between two threats, her back to the fireplace, the baby making every movement awkward and strained. But she'd been in worse situations. The key was turning their coordination against them. "Marcus," she called out, "ask him about the real reason you're here. Ask him what happens to witnesses who know too much." She saw doubt flicker across Marcus's face, saw him glance toward his partner with new wariness. "Don't listen to her," the partner snarled, raising what looked like a military-issue sidearm. "She's trying to divide us." But Sarah had planted the seed. In her experience, partnerships built on money and intimidation were fragile things. Sometimes all they needed was the right pressure to shatter completely. The wind howled through the open door, and Sarah prepared to fight for 2 lives. The scratching had stopped, but Sarah knew better than to trust the silence. Her hand trembled as she pressed the stethoscope against the wall where she'd heard the most activity. Nothing. Then, 3 feet to the left, a faint rustling, deliberate and careful. They were learning to avoid her detection. The fire crackled behind her, casting dancing shadows that made every corner of the cabin seem alive with movement. Sarah's military training screamed at her to maintain situational awareness, but the pregnancy made everything harder. Her center of gravity was off, her stamina compromised, and the baby's increasingly frequent kicks reminded her that time was running out in more ways than one. She'd spent the last hour methodically checking every inch of the cabin's interior walls, tapping with the poker handle and listening for hollow spaces. What she'd discovered made her blood run cold. The scratching wasn't coming from mice or settling wood. The sounds were too organized, too purposeful. Something was moving through a network of spaces between the walls, something that had learned her schedule, her movements. The wind howled outside with renewed fury, rattling the windows until she feared they might shatter. But even that bone-chilling sound was preferable to the deliberate quiet that had settled over whatever lurked in the walls. Sarah lowered herself carefully into the chair she'd positioned in the center of the room, back straight, eyes scanning the perimeter. From here, she could monitor all four walls simultaneously. The shotgun lay across her lap, safety off, finger resting alongside the trigger guard. Professional habits died hard. A soft thud came from directly above her head. Her eyes snapped to the ceiling, tracking a subtle creak as weight shifted across the old wooden beams. The crawl space, of course. She'd been so focused on the walls that she'd forgotten about the narrow space between the ceiling and the roof. In her condition, there was no way she could climb up to investigate, but something was definitely up there. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her elevated heart rate. Sarah placed her free hand on her belly, whispering, "Easy, little one. Mama's got this handled." But did she? The rational part of her mind insisted that whatever was in the walls had to be an animal, possibly a raccoon or even a small bear that had found its way into the cabin's structure before the storm hit. Animals could be territorial, aggressive when cornered, but they were predictable. They followed instinct, not strategy. Another creak, this time moving toward the back of the cabin. Sarah rose as quietly as her pregnant body would allow, shotgun at the ready. She'd reinforced the bedroom door earlier, but if something could move freely through the walls and ceiling, her barricades might be useless. The thought of giving birth while under siege from an unknown threat made her jaw clench with determination. She followed the sounds, each footstep calculated and silent despite her bulk. Years of training had taught her how to move without detection, and pregnancy hadn't erased that muscle memory entirely. The creaking stopped directly above the bedroom. Standing in the doorway, Sarah raised the shotgun toward the ceiling. "I know you're up there," she called out, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Whatever you are, whatever you want, you picked the wrong cabin." Silence stretched for 30 seconds. Then, impossibly, something scratched back. 3 deliberate scratches, a pause, then 3 more. The pattern made her skin crawl. Animals didn't respond to human voices with deliberate patterns. They fled or attacked, but they didn't communicate. Sarah's training kicked into overdrive, adrenaline sharpening her focus despite her exhaustion. She moved to the bedroom closet and retrieved the military-grade flashlight she'd found earlier. Its beam was powerful enough to penetrate the shadows between the ceiling beams if she could find an access point. The bathroom. There had been a small panel in the bathroom ceiling, probably for plumbing access. If she could remove it, she might be able to get a visual on whatever was moving up there. As she turned toward the bathroom, every light in the cabin went out simultaneously. The generator's steady hum died, plunging her into absolute darkness. The fire in the main room provided the only illumination, but it was too far away to help her navigate safely. Sarah's thumb found the flashlight's switch, but she hesitated. The moment she turned it on, she'd become a target, her position revealed to whatever shared the darkness with her. Something heavy hit the floor in the main room with a solid thump. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized that whatever had been in the ceiling was no longer confined to the crawl space. It was in the cabin with her now, moving with the confidence of something that owned the darkness. She pressed her back against the bedroom wall, shotgun raised, and clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing empty space where moments before she'd arranged her defensive position. Then she heard breathing that wasn't her own, coming from somewhere far too close. The creature's shriek echoed through the cabin as Sarah's makeshift spear found its mark, dark ichor spurting from the wound in its torso. But instead of retreating, it lunged forward with renewed fury, its claws raking across her shoulder and tearing through the fabric of her jacket. Pain blazed through her arm as she stumbled backward, fighting to maintain her balance. Her military training kicked in. Assess, adapt, survive. The thing was faster than she'd anticipated, its movements fluid despite its grotesque appearance. She couldn't match its speed, not in her condition, but she could use the confined space to her advantage. Sarah feinted left, then rolled right behind the overturned table, using it as a barrier. The creature's claws scraped against wood as it tried to reach her, splintering the surface. She needed a better weapon, something with more reach. Her eyes scanned the debris-strewn room and landed on the iron fireplace poker she'd spotted earlier. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if sensing the danger. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered, then made her move. She dove toward the fireplace, her fingers closing around the poker's handle just as the creature vaulted over the table. The iron was cold and solid in her grip, a proper weapon at last. She swung upward in a defensive arc, catching the thing across its elongated jaw. The impact sent vibrations up her arms, but the creature staggered back, hissing. Blood, her blood, dripped steadily from her shoulder, leaving a trail on the floor. She couldn't afford to lose much more, not with the baby depending on her. The creature circled her now, more cautious after tasting the poker's bite. Its pale eyes never left hers, intelligent and calculating. That intelligence was what terrified her most. This wasn't just some mindless beast, it was thinking, planning, and it had been living in these walls for who knew how long, learning the cabin's layout, waiting. The creature suddenly charged. But this time, Sarah was ready. She sidestepped and brought the poker down hard across its spine. The thing collapsed with a bone-rattling crack, but even as it fell, its arm swept out and caught her legs. Sarah crashed to the floor, the poker skittering away across the boards. She rolled desperately as claws slashed where her head had been, gouging furrows in the wood. The creature was badly injured now, its movements jerky and uncoordinated, but it wasn't finished. Neither was she. Sarah's hand found a shard of broken glass from the shattered window. Without hesitation, she drove it deep into the creature's neck. Hot blood splashed across her face as the thing let out a gurgling scream. It thrashed wildly, but she held on, twisting the glass deeper until the movements finally stilled. Silence filled the cabin except for her ragged breathing and the storm's relentless howling outside. Sarah pushed herself away from the corpse, her whole body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. The shoulder wound throbbed with each heartbeat, but she was alive. They were both alive. She struggled to her feet, one hand pressed against her belly. The baby had gone still during the fight, but now she felt movement again, gentle, reassuring. "We did it," she whispered. "We're okay." But even as she said it, she knew this wasn't over. The holes in the walls gaped like wounds, and she had no idea if there were others like the creature she'd just killed. The blizzard outside showed no signs of stopping, and she was trapped here until it passed. First things first, she needed to tend to her wound before infection set in. Sarah made her way to the kitchen, stepping carefully around the creature's body. She found a relatively clean dish towel and pressed it against the gashes on her shoulder, gritting her teeth against the pain. The scratches were deep, but not life-threatening, though they'd need proper cleaning. She heated water in a pot over the fire, then used it to flush out the wounds as best she could. The pain was excruciating, but she'd endured worse during her tours overseas. As she worked, her mind raced through possibilities. She needed to secure the cabin, block off those holes somehow. The furniture was mostly destroyed, but she might be able to fashion barriers from the wreckage, and she needed to stay alert. If one of these things had been living in the walls, there could be more. A sound from outside made her freeze, not the wind this time, but something else. A scratching, scrabbling noise that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Her blood turned to ice as she realized what it meant. The creature she'd killed hadn't been alone, and the others had heard the fight. Sarah grabbed the poker and moved toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Whatever came next, she'd be ready. She had to be. There was no choice now but to fight, because surrender meant death, not just for her, but for the innocent life she carried. The scratching grew louder, closer. They were coming. The creature's shriek echoed through the cabin as Maya's makeshift spear found its mark, piercing the pale, elongated torso. Black ichor spurted from the wound, hissing as it hit the wooden floor like acid. The thing staggered backward, its multiple limbs flailing wildly, claws raking deep gouges in the walls. Maya pressed her advantage, driving the spear deeper despite the agony shooting through her contracting abdomen. Her baby chose this moment to make its urgent demands known, but she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close to ending this nightmare. The creature's pale eyes fixed on her with alien intelligence, and for a terrifying moment she thought she heard it speak. Not with words, but with a sound that bypassed her ears and went straight to her brain, a low, thrumming communication that made her teeth ache. It was calling to the others. Maya yanked the spear free and stumbled backward as answering calls echoed from within the walls. The scratching sounds she'd been hearing for days intensified into a symphony of movement. They were coming, all of them. Another contraction hit, this one stronger than before, and Maya gasped as she felt warm fluid running down her legs. Her water had broken. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not. The wounded creature lunged at her again, moving with desperate fury. Maya sidestepped, using her military training to turn the thing's momentum against it. She drove the spear into its back as it passed, feeling the weapon punch through whatever passed for its spine. It collapsed, twitching, but the victory felt hollow. The walls around her were alive with movement now, and she could see pale shapes pressing against the thin barriers between the studs. The old cabin's construction was the only thing keeping them at bay, but that wouldn't last long. Maya backed toward the fireplace, keeping the flames between herself and the emerging threats. The fire was her ally, she'd learned that much. Whatever these things were, they avoided the light and heat. A section of wall exploded outward near the kitchen, and two more creatures spilled through. These were smaller than the first, but moved with terrifying coordination. They flanked her immediately, forcing her to divide her attention between multiple threats. Maya grabbed a burning log from the fireplace, ignoring the pain as the heat scorched her palm. She swung it like a club, catching one creature across what might have been its face. The smell of burning flesh filled the air as it reeled back, chittering in pain. The second creature circled behind her, but Maya had anticipated this. She spun, driving her spear into its center mass while using the burning log to keep the first one at bay. Her movements were becoming slower, more labored, as her body focused on the imminent birth. She couldn't keep this up much longer. More walls gave way. 4 creatures now, then 5. They seemed to sense her weakening state and grew bolder, pressing closer despite the fire. Maya found herself backed into the corner by the hearth, using furniture as barriers and grabbing anything that would burn to expand her protective circle of light. A particularly strong contraction doubled her over, and one of the creatures seized the opportunity. It leaped forward, claws extended, but Maya managed to raise her spear just in time. The thing impaled itself on the weapon, but its momentum carried it into her, knocking her to the ground. Maya rolled away as claws raked the floor where she'd been lying. She grabbed another burning log and hurled it at the nearest creature, then used the moment of confusion to regain her footing. Her back was against the stone fireplace now, nowhere left to retreat. The creatures formed a semicircle around her, pale forms moving in the firelight like nightmares given shape. They were learning, adapting their tactics. No longer rushing in blindly, they waited, watching for their moment. Maya's hand found the emergency flare gun she'd tucked into her belt. She'd been saving it, hoping for rescue, but rescue wasn't coming. Not in time. She had to save herself and her baby. She pulled the flare gun free and aimed it at the largest creature, the one that seemed to be directing the others. "Come on then," she growled through gritted teeth, feeling another contraction building. "Let's finish this." The creature tilted its head, studying her with those pale, intelligent eyes. For a moment, the cabin was silent except for the crackling of the fire and Maya's labored breathing. Then it charged, and the others followed. Maya pulled the trigger. The flare streaked across the cabin in a brilliant burst of red light, striking the lead creature center mass. It erupted in flames, its alien screams filling the air as it thrashed wildly, setting two others ablaze. The remaining creatures hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Maya used their confusion to grab more burning wood, building up her defenses. She could hold them off a little longer. She had to. Her baby was coming, and she would not let these things win. The basement floor felt like ice against Sarah's bare feet as she crept toward the furnace room, her makeshift spear clutched in trembling hands. Every shadow seemed to writhe and pulse in the dim light filtering down from the kitchen above. The silence was absolute, except for her ragged breathing and the distant howl of wind that had plagued her for days. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, inching forward. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, as if sensing the danger that permeated every corner of this cursed place. Her military training screamed at her to move with purpose, but exhaustion and pregnancy made every step feel like she was walking through quicksand. The furnace room door stood ajar, just as she'd left it when she'd fled upstairs. But something was different now. The air itself seemed thicker, charged with an electricity that made her skin crawl. She could smell it again, that sickly sweet odor of decay that had been growing stronger with each passing hour. Sarah edged closer to the doorway and peered inside. The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the scattered bones she'd discovered earlier. But now there were more of them, fresh ones. And they weren't just scattered randomly, they were arranged in careful patterns around what looked like a makeshift altar made from stacked stones. Her blood turned to ice water. Someone had been down here while she was upstairs. Someone was still in the cabin with her. A soft scraping sound echoed from the far corner of the room, like fingernails dragging across stone. Sarah's grip tightened on her weapon as she swept the flashlight beam toward the noise. The light caught something pale moving in the shadows, a figure hunched over what appeared to be a small pile of clothing. "I know you're there," Sarah called out, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Come out where I can see you." The scraping stopped. For a long moment the only sound was the thundering of her own heartbeat. Then, slowly, the figure began to unfold itself from the corner. What emerged from the shadows was barely recognizable as human. The man was gaunt to the point of being skeletal, his clothes hanging in tatters from his emaciated frame. His hair had grown long and wild, and his fingernails had been worn down to bloody nubs from clawing at stone. But it was his eyes that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. They held the unmistakable glint of complete madness. "You shouldn't have come down here," he whispered, his voice like dried leaves scraping against pavement. "This is my place, my sanctuary." Sarah kept the spear pointed at him while backing toward the doorway. "Who are you? What are you doing in this house?" The man laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or sanity. "I built this house, every beam, every stone, and when the world above became too much to bear, I carved out my own little kingdom beneath it." He gestured to the arranged bones around him. "I've had many guests over the years. They all stay forever." Understanding crashed over Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't some squatter who had taken refuge during the storm. This was the cabin's owner, the one everyone assumed had simply abandoned the property. He'd been living down here all along, in the walls, under the floors, watching and waiting. The scratching sounds she breathed, the food disappearing. That was you. "I don't need much to survive," he said, taking a shuffling step toward her. "But winter gets so lonely. When I saw you arrive, so round and full of life, I thought perhaps this year would be different. Perhaps this year I'd have company for the whole season." The baby kicked hard against Sarah's ribs, as if urging her to run. But there was nowhere to go except back up those narrow stairs, and she could see in his eyes that he had no intention of letting her leave. Her mind raced through tactical possibilities. He was clearly weakened by malnutrition, and whatever mental breakdown had led him to this underground existence. But desperation and insanity could make even the frailest person dangerous, and she was heavily pregnant and exhausted. "You don't want to do this," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. "I'm not a threat to you. We can both wait out the storm and go our separate ways." The man's laugh turned into a wet, hacking cough. "Oh, but you don't understand. There is no going anywhere. The storm will end, yes, but spring is still months away, and I do so hate being alone." His eyes dropped to her swollen belly. "Besides, waste not, want not. 2 meals instead of 1. Sarah's military training finally overrode her shock and fear. She shifted her stance, bringing the spear up to a proper attack position. If he wanted a fight, she'd give him one he wouldn't soon forget. The man smiled, revealing teeth filed down to sharp points, and began to circle toward her with predatory intent. The creature's shriek echoed through the cabin as Sarah's makeshift spear found its mark, piercing through what looked like translucent flesh. Black ichor sprayed across the wooden walls, hissing where it landed like acid. The thing recoiled, its elongated limbs flailing as it scrambled back toward the gaping hole in the wall. Sarah pressed her advantage, gripping the fire poker with both hands, despite the sharp pain shooting through her swollen belly. Her baby kicked frantically, as if sensing the danger. The military training she'd buried for years surged through her veins like electricity. "Assess, adapt, attack. Not today," she growled, lunging forward as the creature tried to retreat. But the thing was faster than she'd anticipated. It twisted with an unnatural flexibility, avoiding her strike, and one of its elongated arms swept across her legs. Sarah stumbled, catching herself against the stone fireplace just as another contraction seized her core. The timing couldn't be worse. Her water had broken 20 minutes ago, and the contractions were coming closer together. She estimated maybe 2 hours before the baby decided to make its entrance, whether the cabin was secure or not. The creature circled her now, staying just outside the flickering light cast by the dying fire. Its form seemed to shift and blur in the shadows, making it difficult to track. Sarah could hear its breathing, a wet, rasping sound like air being pulled through damaged lungs. She reached behind her, fingers finding the handle of the cast-iron skillet she'd left by the hearth. In one fluid motion, she spun and hurled it toward the sound. The pan connected with a solid thunk, followed by an enraged howl. Using the momentary distraction, Sarah grabbed the emergency flare from her supplies and yanked the cord. Brilliant red light flooded the cabin, and for the first time she got a clear look at her attacker. It was worse than she'd imagined. The creature stood nearly 7 feet tall, its pale, almost transparent skin stretched over a skeletal frame. Where its face should have been was a writhing mass of tendrils surrounding a circular mouth lined with needle-sharp teeth. Its arms were grotesquely elongated, ending in fingers that looked more like surgical instruments than claws. But what made her stomach lurch was the recognition. She'd seen something like this before, in classified files during her final military assignment. Project Winterhold, the biological research facility that had supposedly been destroyed in an avalanche 5 years ago. The flare's intense light seemed to disorient the creature. It stumbled backward, covering what passed for its face with those horrible hands. Sarah didn't waste the opportunity. She grabbed her go-bag and backed toward the cabin's rear window, keeping the flare between herself and the thing. Her foot hit something soft, and she glanced down to see Dr. Matthews' body. His chest had been torn open with surgical precision, ribs spread like the pages of a book, but his medical bag was still intact. Another contraction hit, this one strong enough to drop her to one knee. The creature's head snapped toward her at the sound of her sharp intake of breath. It took a step forward, then another, growing bolder as the flare began to dim. Sarah's mind raced through her options. The cabin had one exit besides the compromised wall, a small window that led to the storage room. If she could reach it, she might be able to escape into the storm. But in her condition, in this weather, it would be a death sentence. Unless... She remembered the snowmobile she'd seen behind the cabin when she first arrived. If it still ran, if she could reach it, she might have a chance. The creature was advancing again, moving with predatory confidence. Sarah pulled the pin on her second flare, holding it ready but not yet activating it. She needed to time this perfectly. When the thing was just 10 feet away, she yanked the cord and threw the flare directly at its center mass. The creature shrieked and stumbled backward as red fire erupted across its torso. The chemical heat ate into its translucent flesh, creating smoking wounds that leaked that acidic black blood. Sarah was already moving, crashing through the rear window in a shower of glass and frigid air. She hit the snow hard, her pregnant belly making the landing awkward and painful. Behind her, she could hear the creature thrashing in the cabin, its cries of pain and rage echoing across the mountain. The storm was still raging, snow whipping through the air with hurricane force. She could barely see 3 feet in any direction, but she remembered the general location of the snowmobile. She half crawled, half stumbled through the drifts, her hands already going numb from the cold. Another contraction seized her, this one lasting nearly a full minute. When it passed, she realized she could no longer hear the creature's cries over the wind. That meant it was either dead or it was hunting her. Her fingers found the snowmobile's handlebar just as something crashed through the cabin's front door behind her. The creature's screech pierced the howling wind as Maya's makeshift spear found its mark between armored plates. Black ichor sprayed across the cabin wall, but the thing didn't fall. Instead, it thrashed wildly, its massive claws raking gouges in the wooden floor as it tried to dislodge the metal rod protruding from its flank. Maya rolled away, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, just as talons sliced through the air where her head had been. Her military training kicked in fully now. Assess, adapt, survive. The creature was wounded but far from defeated, and she could hear more of them moving in the walls, their chittering growing louder and more agitated. She scrambled toward the fireplace, where she'd left the remaining flare. Her fingers closed around the plastic tube just as the wounded creature lunged again. Maya yanked the ignition cord and thrust the brilliant red flame directly into its face. The thing reeled back with a sound like steam escaping a kettle, its pale flesh bubbling and smoking where the chemical fire touched it. But the light revealed something that made Maya's blood freeze, dozens of glowing eyes reflecting from every crack and crevice in the cabin walls. They'd been patient, testing her defenses, but now they were coming. The first creature collapsed, twitching, as others began pouring through the gaps like living nightmares. Maya backed toward the bathroom, the only room she'd managed to fully seal. Her baby kicked frantically as adrenaline flooded her system. "Not today," she whispered fiercely, one hand on her belly. "We're not dying today." She slammed the bathroom door and immediately began piling everything she could against it, the toilet tank lid, towel bars she ripped from the walls, anything to buy precious seconds. Outside, claws scraped against wood and something heavy slammed into the door repeatedly. Maya turned to the small bathroom window she'd boarded up days ago. Her makeshift barricade held, but she could hear them outside too, surrounding the cabin completely. She was trapped with nowhere to run, and her ammunition was down to the hunting knife and one emergency road flare. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya felt a familiar tightening in her abdomen. Not now, please, not now. But her body wasn't listening to desperation. The contractions were real, brought on by stress and exertion at the worst possible moment. She sank to her knees as another contraction hit, breathing through it the way her birthing class had taught her. The creatures outside grew more frenzied, as if they could smell her vulnerability. The bathroom door splintered under their assault. Maya's mind raced through possibilities: the propane tank, the old cast-iron bathtub, the remaining flare. An idea formed, desperate, dangerous, but their only chance. She turned the bathroom faucets on full, then used her knife to puncture the small propane canister from the camping stove she'd brought inside. Gas hissed into the enclosed space as water pooled on the floor. Maya climbed into the bathtub and pulled the heavy shower curtain around her like a shield. The bathroom door exploded inward. 3 creatures squeezed through simultaneously, their pale bodies glistening with that same dark ichor. They paused, confusion evident in their alien features as they processed the flooding room and the smell of gas. Maya held her breath and pulled the flare's ignition. The explosion was deafening in the small space. Fire bloomed outward as the gas ignited, but the water on the floor prevented it from becoming a true inferno. The creatures shrieked as flames washed over them, their chittering turning to agonized wails. Through the smoke and chaos, Maya heard the most beautiful sound imaginable, helicopter rotors cutting through the storm. The search and rescue team had finally reached the mountain. She hauled herself out of the tub as the creatures retreated, burned and disoriented. The bathroom was a smoking ruin, but the explosion had blown a hole through the exterior wall, large enough for her to escape through. Maya squeezed through the gap just as another contraction hit. She collapsed in the snow outside, the blizzard's wind shocking after the heat of the explosion. Above her, searchlights pierced the storm as the helicopter fought to maintain position. "Down here!" she screamed, waving her arms despite the pain. "I'm down here!" The spotlight found her, a brilliant beacon of hope cutting through the nightmare. Maya could see figures rappelling down from the aircraft, their voices carrying over the wind as they shouted coordinates to each other. But as strong hands finally reached her, lifting her towards safety, Maya looked back at the smoking cabin one last time. Through the broken walls and shattered windows, she caught glimpses of pale shapes retreating into darkness, disappearing back into whatever hell had spawned them. The creatures weren't dead. They were simply waiting for the next storm, the next isolated victim. But that was a problem for another day, for people with flamethrowers and hazmat suits and official protocols. Right now, she had a baby to deliver. The floorboards groaned beneath Sarah's feet as she backed toward the kitchen, the creature's yellow eyes tracking her every movement. Blood trickled down her left arm, where its claws had found purchase, but the pain felt distant, muted by the surge of protective fury coursing through her veins. The thing that had once been human crouched in the doorway, its elongated limbs twitching with predatory anticipation. The journal's final entries had been right: the isolation, the hunger, the gradual transformation into something else entirely. How many winters had it survived in these walls? How many travelers had never made it down the mountain? Sarah's hand closed around the kitchen knife she'd left on the counter. The blade felt solid, real, against the nightmare unfolding before her. Another contraction seized her abdomen, and she gritted her teeth, breathing through the pain. Not now, not yet. The creature lunged. Years of military training kicked in as Sarah sidestepped, slashing upward with the knife. The blade caught the thing across its elongated torso, drawing a shriek that rattled the windows. Black ichor sprayed across the cabin walls, steaming where it hit the wooden surfaces. But the wound barely slowed it down. The creature spun with inhuman speed, one clawed hand raking across Sarah's shoulder, sending her stumbling backward into the kitchen table. Dishes crashed to the floor as she rolled aside, narrowly avoiding another swipe. The fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows across the walls, turning the cabin into a hellscape of movement and menace. Sarah's breath came in sharp pants as she circled the table, keeping the wooden surface between herself and the creature. Think, what kills something that shouldn't exist? The answer came with another glance at the roaring fire. Heat. The journal had mentioned the cold, the endless hunger for warmth. Whatever this thing had become, it was still bound by certain natural laws. Sarah feinted left, then dove right, grabbing a burning log from the fireplace with a pair of tongs. The creature pursued her movement, its claws scraping gouges in the table's surface. When it leaped over the obstacle, Sarah was ready. She thrust the burning wood forward like a torch. The creature's shriek became something inhuman as flames licked across its pale, mottled skin. The stench of burning flesh filled the cabin as it stumbled backward, batting at the fire spreading across its torso. But Sarah wasn't finished. Another contraction doubled her over, and she knew she was running out of time on multiple fronts. The storm outside howled with renewed fury, and something told her this thing wouldn't be the only danger once her child arrived. She grabbed a bottle of cooking oil from the counter, uncapping it with her teeth as the creature writhed in the corner, still burning but not yet defeated. Sarah splashed the oil across its form, and the flames erupted with new intensity. This time, the screaming stopped. The thing that had haunted these mountains for decades collapsed into itself, the unnatural proportions of its limbs folding as the fire consumed what remained of its borrowed humanity. Within minutes, only ash and the acrid smell of smoke remained. Sarah sank against the wall, clutching her belly as another wave of pain washed over her. The contractions were coming faster now, each one stronger than the last. She looked toward the windows, where the first pale hints of dawn struggled through the storm clouds. The blizzard was finally beginning to weaken. She stumbled to the radio, hoping against hope that the morning might bring better atmospheric conditions. Static filled the speakers for long moments before a faint voice broke through. "Emergency services, this is Mountain Rescue Station 7. Please identify yourself and your location." Sarah's voice cracked with relief and exhaustion. "This is Sarah Chen. I'm trapped in a cabin approximately 8 miles up the Whitmore Trail. I'm in active labor and need immediate evacuation." "Copy that, Sarah. We have teams mobilizing as soon as conditions permit. Can you describe your situation?" She glanced at the pile of ash in the corner, then at her own bloodied hands. How could she possibly explain what had happened here? "I'm alone, but stable for now. The cabin is secure and I have heat." "Understood. Estimated arrival in 2 hours. Can you hold out until then?" Another contraction answered for her, this one so intense she had to grip the radio table to remain upright. "I'll have to," as she prepared for the final challenge ahead, bringing her child into a world that had just proven far stranger and more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just survival, but the fierce, uncompromising strength that came from protecting what mattered most. Outside, the wind was finally dying down. Inside, new life stirred, ready to meet whatever came next.